They called her breeding stock. The words rang across Redemption Gulch like a gunshot, sharp enough to cut through the thin autumn air and lodge in every ear within the square. Heads turned, boots stopped. Laughter followed, ugly and curious, the kind that fed on humiliation. Pearl Pritchard stood on the auction platform with her hands clenched at her sides, her shoulders squared, because she had learned over 25 years that collapsing only made the cruelty worse. Her brother's grip was bruising on her arm, his fingers digging in as if she were already something owned. $1, Jonas Pritchard shouted, voice thick with drink and spite. I'm selling my sister for $1 to any man who wants her. Big, healthy, strong as an ox, built to bear children, 540 pounds of good breeding stock. The crowd swelled closer. Some men laughed openly. Some women looked away. Most simply stared, hungry for spectacle. Pearl felt heat crawl up her neck, but she did not cry. Crying had never saved her. Since their parents died, Jonas had made it clear she was a burden. Too big, too expensive, too much of everything. He had fed her insults until she believed them, then blamed her for being hungry. She eats too much, Jonas went on, but that just means she's fertile. Wide hips, strong bones. First man to put $1 in my hand gets her. Paper signed, legal and proper. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This is disgusting, a woman protested weakly. You can't sell your own sister. Jonas sneered. She ain't my sister anymore. She's livestock. Pearl stared straight ahead, her ears ringing. She thought of the nights she had gone to bed hungry so Jonas could drink. Of the mornings she rose early to work while he slept. Of every time she had been called useless, ugly, stupid. Now she was being sold for $1. Her chest tightened. She did not beg. She did not scream. Something inside her had gone quiet, like a door closing to keep the last of her dignity intact. I'll pay. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, deep, calm, lethal. The square fell silent. A man stepped forward, and instinctively people moved aside to let him pass. He was enormous, built like a walking threat, dressed in black from boots to coat. Scars marked his face. His eyes were cold metal, unreadable and unafraid. Cain Blackwood. The name moved through the crowd in whispers. The Reaper of the Rockies. Bounty hunter. Killer of killers. A man men feared even when they had blood on their own hands. He held a silver dollar between his fingers. Jonas's bravado faltered. You're Cain Blackwood. That's right, Cain said evenly. He flicked the coin. Jonas caught it by reflex. There's your dollar. The crowd held its breath. Where are the papers? Jonas fumbled, suddenly eager, shoving a document forward with shaken hands. Cain read it slowly, carefully, his jaw tightening with each line. This says marriage, Cain said, not ownership. Jonas shrugged. Same thing. Cain's hand closed around Jonas's throat and lifted him clean off the platform. It's not, Cain said softly, and you're going to sign this properly, witness it, and then you're going to walk away and never speak to her again. If you do, I'll find you. Jonas nodded frantically. Cain released him. Then Cain turned to Pearl. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, but his voice dropped, steady and clear. Miss Pritchard, I didn't buy you. I bought you out of hell. You're free unless you choose otherwise. Pearl met his gaze for the first time, and something in her shattered open. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. Pearl Pritchard had learned very young how to disappear while standing in plain sight. She was tall for a woman and broad besides, her body solid and unmistakable in a world that preferred women small, quiet, and easily ignored. At 540 pounds, she could not slip into corners or fade into crowds. So instead, she learned to still herself, to keep her face neutral, to endure. Since the day their parents died of fever, Pearl had belonged to her brother. Jonas Pritchard had been 22 then, angry at the world and resentful of responsibility. Pearl was 12, already bigger than most girls her age, already aware that her body made people uncomfortable. Jonas called it care, guardianship. In truth, it was ownership. You eat too much. You cost too much. No man will want you. The words became the background noise of her life. Pearl worked, she cooked, she cleaned, she hauled water and chopped vegetables and mended clothes until her fingers cracked. She slept on a thin mattress in the corner of the house and learned to wake before Jonas so she could avoid his temper in the mornings. In Redemption Gulch, people knew her as Jonas's sister, the big one, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble. That morning, she had followed him to the square because he told her to. "Stand there," he said, shoving her onto the auction platform, "and don't say a word." She thought it was a cruel joke at first. Jonas had many of those. But when the crowd began to gather and he started shouting prices, reality crashed down on her harder than any blow he had ever delivered. Breeding stock. The phrase echoed in her head, heavy and obscene. Pearl stared out over the crowd and saw every reaction at once. Amusement in some men's eyes, calculation in others, pity from a few women who did nothing to stop it. No one stepped forward to protect her. No one called the sheriff. Because, she realized with sick clarity, no one had ever protected her before. Jonas's voice rose, louder, uglier, feeding on attention. "She's strong. She'll give you sons. Ain't pretty, but she'll do the job." Pearl felt something inside her retreat. Not break. Retreat. Like an animal pulling back from pain it could not escape. Then Cain Blackwood spoke. When he stepped forward, the air itself seemed to shift. Pearl had heard stories about him since she was a girl. Everyone had. He was spoken of the way people spoke of storms and fires, forces that did not care who stood in their path. Up close, he was terrifying. But when he looked at her, something unexpected happened. He did not look at her body. He looked at her face. "Miss Pritchard," he said, after Jonas had signed and the crowd had gone quiet again, "I need you to listen to me." His voice was low, controlled, stripped of the menace it carried for everyone else. "You don't owe me anything," he continued. "Not obedience, not gratitude, not marriage. I used the only legal means available to stop what was happening here. That's all." Pearl swallowed hard. "My brother is done," Cain said flatly, "with you, with your life." Jonas hovered nearby, already shrinking into himself. His earlier bravado evaporated. Cain did not even glance at him. "I have no intention of forcing you to stay with me," Cain said. "You can leave this town today if you want. I will see you safely to wherever you choose." The words felt unreal. Freedom was something other people talked about, something that happened far away to people whose lives mattered. "And if I don't know where to go?" Pearl asked quietly. Cain studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something important. "Then you can come with me, to my cabin. It's isolated, but it's safe. You'll have time to think, to rest, to decide who you want to be when no one's calling you names. Pearl's chest ached. The crowd watched, confused now. The spectacle had slipped out of their control. This was no longer entertainment. Jonas scoffed weakly. "She'll just slow you down." Cain turned his head just enough to acknowledge him. "You talk again, and you'll need more than $1 to fix what happens next." Jonas backed away. Cain offered Pearl his arm, not his hand, not a grip. His arm, as one might offer a lady leaving church. Pearl hesitated only a moment before taking it. As they walked away from the platform, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. Whispers followed, some mocking, some fearful, some uncertain. But for the first time, Pearl did not feel alone under them. They mounted their horses outside town. Cain had already prepared a mare for her, large and calm, its saddle adjusted carefully. "You ride?" he asked. "Yes," Pearl said. "My father taught me." Cain nodded. "Good." They rode out of Redemption Gulch beneath a sky heavy with clouds and unspoken consequences. Pearl did not look back. Her life, defined for so long by cruelty and silence, had been torn open in front of everyone. And in its place, something fragile and dangerous had appeared. Possibility. They rode out of Redemption Gulch as the sun dipped low, turning the dust in the road to copper and shadow. Pearl felt every step her mare took, every sway of the saddle, her body stiff with exhaustion, and something sharper than fear. Uncertainty. Cain Blackwood rode beside her without crowding her space. His black stallion moved with the confidence of a creature that trusted its rider absolutely. Cain himself said little, but his silence was not heavy. It felt intentional, like he understood that Pearl's mind was full enough already. For miles, the land stretched wide and empty. Rolling grass gave way to scattered pine, then steeper ground where the road narrowed and the world felt older, less forgiving. Pearl had lived her whole life surrounded by people who made her feel watched. Out here, she felt seen for the first time and strangely unseen at the same time. "You can stop whenever you need," Cain said at last, his voice steady. "No hurry." Pearl nodded. "I'm all right." He did not question her answer. He simply adjusted his pace to hers, matching the mare's rhythm without comment. It was a small thing. It mattered more than she expected. They made camp near a creek as dusk settled in. Cain dismounted first, tethered the horses, and set about building a fire with practiced efficiency. Pearl watched, unsure where to put herself. In Redemption Gulch, she was always told what to do. Here, no one gave her orders. "You can sit," Cain said, noticing her hesitation, "or help. Either's fine." She chose to help. He handed her kindling, showed her where to place it. Their hands brushed briefly. He did not flinch or linger. The normalcy of it made her throat tighten. They ate simply that night. Salted meat, bread, hot coffee that burned pleasantly on the way down. Cain waited until Pearl had settled comfortably before he took his own portion. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I choose to." The creek murmured beside them. Night insects filled the air with sound. For the first time since the auction, Pearl felt her shoulders loosen. "Why mountains?" she asked after a while. Cain stared into the fire. "They don't lie. They don't pretend to be kind when they're not. If you respect them, they let you live. And people? They lie constantly," he said, "and they punish you for believing them." Pearl felt the truth of that settle deep in her bones. They rode again at dawn. The trail grew steeper, narrower, cutting through dense forest where light filtered down in broken shards. The air thinned and cooled. Pearl's legs ached, her back stiffened, but she did not complain. She had learned long ago that endurance was safer than asking for mercy. Cain noticed anyway. By midday, he called a halt near a stand of aspens. "We rest." Pearl dismounted carefully, grateful. Cain handed her water, then stepped away to check the horses, giving her space without making a show of it. "You're doing better than most," he said when he returned. She almost laughed. "Most what?" "Most people who've had their lives turned inside out in a single afternoon." She looked down at her hands. "I keep waiting for this to be taken back, like someone will tell me it was a mistake." "It wasn't," Cain said firmly. "What happened back there is finished." "People don't usually let things finish," Pearl replied. He met her gaze. "I do." They reached higher ground by evening. Snow lingered in shaded places despite the season, and the wind carried a sharp edge. Cain set camp again, this time with a windbreak of canvas and stone. As Pearl settled onto a blanket, exhaustion finally caught up to her. Her body trembled, not from cold alone, but from the release of tension she had carried for years. Cain noticed immediately. "Hey," he said quietly, "you're safe." The words were simple. They landed like a promise. He placed another blanket over her shoulders, careful not to touch her more than necessary. Then he sat a short distance away, facing outward, keeping watch. "You don't have to stay up," she murmured. "I will," he said. "It's my habit." Sleep took her quickly. When she woke, the fire was low but steady, and Cain was still there. Dawn painted the mountains pale gold. Pearl felt something she did not recognize at first. Peace. The third day brought them into truly wild country, no roads, just narrow trails and Cain's sure knowledge of the land. They crossed a shallow river, climbed switchbacks carved into rock, and finally crested a ridge that stole Pearl's breath. Below them, tucked against a cliff face, stood a cabin. Stone and timber, solid, intentional. Smoke curled from its chimney. "That's home," Cain said. Pearl stared. "It's real." He nodded. "Built it myself." The cabin was larger than she expected. Clean, orderly. Inside, there was a wide hearth, sturdy furniture, shelves of books, and a bed with thick quilts folded neatly at the foot. "This room is yours," Cain said, opening a door off the main space. "I'll sleep out here." Pearl turned to him, startled. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want you to feel comfortable." She stepped into the room slowly, running her fingers over the quilt. No one had ever prepared a space just for her. "Thank you," she whispered. Cain inclined his head. "Rest. We'll talk when you're ready." As the door closed softly behind him, Pearl sat on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe. She was far from Redemption Gulch, far from the platform, far from the voices that had named her worthless. The mountains stood around her, silent and indifferent, and for the first time in her life, that indifference felt like mercy. Life in the mountains did not soften itself for Pearl Pritchard. The mornings were cold. The air bit at her lungs when she stepped outside. Wind swept down the slopes without apology, and snow arrived early that year, dusting the ground in thin white warnings long before winter truly claimed the peaks. Yet for the first time in her life, hardship did not come with cruelty attached. Cain Blackwood rose before dawn every day. Pearl learned this by sound at first, the low scrape of boots, the soft crackle of the fire being coaxed back to life. He never woke her, never hovered. When she emerged from her room, there was always warmth waiting. Coffee, bread, sometimes eggs, always enough. He ate only after she did. At first, Pearl tried to protest. "You don't have to wait on me." Cain glanced at her once, calm and unyielding. "I'm not waiting on you. I'm sharing a table." That ended the argument. The cabin itself was a quiet marvel. Built partly into the mountain, its stone walls held warmth like a living thing. Heavy beams crossed the ceiling, darkened by smoke and time. A long table sat near the hearth, scarred by years of use. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, tools, and ledgers written in Cain's precise hand. Pearl moved through the space cautiously at first, afraid of doing something wrong. Cain noticed. "This isn't a museum," he said one morning when she froze mid-step after brushing a shelf. "It's meant to be lived in." She nodded, though old habits were slow to loosen. He gave her work, but never as an order. "If you want," he would say, or "only if you feel up to it." She cooked meals that grew more confident with time, experimenting with dried herbs and preserved vegetables. Cain praised nothing loudly, but he always ate every bite. When a chair creaked under her weight one evening, Pearl stiffened instinctively, shame flaring hot and familiar. Cain rose without a word, brought another chair, tested it carefully, and replaced the first. "No one here is keeping score," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. As days turned into weeks, Pearl began to change in ways she did not immediately recognize. She slept through the night. She laughed, surprised by the sound of it. She spoke without bracing herself for ridicule. Cain taught her the rhythms of the mountain, how to split wood without straining her back, how to read the weather in the clouds hugging the peaks, how to move quietly through snow without wasting energy. "You don't fight the land," he told her. "You listen to it." In return, Pearl brought order to his chaos. She organized his bounty records, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. She balanced accounts he had ignored for years. She noticed patterns in his work that even he had overlooked. "You're good at this," Cain said one evening, watching her sort papers by the fire. "I had to be," Pearl replied. "When you live with someone like my brother, details keep you alive." Cain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. At night, the cabin grew quiet, except for wind and flame. They often sat by the fire reading, the silence between them companionable rather than strained. Cain never intruded on her space, never assumed anything. That restraint mattered. One night, Pearl asked, "Why do people fear you so much?" Cain considered the question carefully. "Because fear keeps dangerous men from thinking they can hurt me, or the people under my protection." "Am I under your protection?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, really looked. "Only if you want to be." She nodded. "I do?" Winter came hard and fast. Snow sealed the passes. The world narrowed to the cabin, the animals, the fire, and each other. Pearl learned to bake with limited supplies, to stretch meals without making them small. Cain hunted when weather allowed, returning with meat he cleaned and prepared with quiet efficiency. He always brought the heaviest loads inside himself, even when Pearl offered to help. "You're not fragile," she said once, annoyed. "I know," he replied, "but neither am I." The distinction was subtle. It mattered. One evening, Pearl dropped a pot, and it shattered against the stone floor. The sound echoed sharply. She froze, heart racing, waiting for anger that never came. Cain knelt, gathering the pieces. It was old. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. He looked up. "For what? For breaking it?" "It served its time," he said calmly. "Now we'll replace it." Something inside Pearl shifted. No punishment, no lecture, no tally added to some invisible debt. That night, she cried quietly in her room, grief and relief tangled together. As the weeks passed, Cain began teaching her to shoot, not because he expected danger, but because he believed knowledge was power. He adjusted the rifle to fit her body, showed her how to brace, how to breathe. He corrected her gently, never mocking, never impatient. "You learn fast," he said, after she hit the target cleanly for the third time. Pearl smiled, pride blooming where shame once lived. She learned to track, to recognize animal signs, to move with intention rather than apology. "You take up space like someone who belongs," Cain observed one afternoon. Pearl startled. "Is that bad?" "No," he said. "It's powerful." By late winter, the cabin no longer felt like refuge alone. It felt like home. One night, as snow fell thick outside and the fire burned low, Cain spoke without looking at her. "I need to tell you something." Pearl's pulse quickened. "All right." "I didn't buy you that day because it was convenient," he said. "I bought you because I couldn't stand to watch you be destroyed." She waited. "And because," he continued, voice roughening slightly, "I had already noticed you years before, in town, the way you endured, the way you were kind, even when no one was kind to you." Pearl felt tears rise. "I never meant to trap you here," Cain said. "If you choose to leave when spring comes, I'll help you." She stood slowly and crossed the room until she was in front of him. "I'm not trapped," she said. "I'm choosing." He looked up at her, something vulnerable flickering through his fearsome calm. "So am I," he said. The fire crackled. Wind pressed against the walls. Two people, long treated as less than human in different ways, sat together in quiet understanding. Outside, winter still ruled. Inside, something stronger had taken root. The first sign that peace would not last came with the tracks. Cain noticed them at dawn, just beyond the tree line where the snow should have been untouched. Boot prints, 3 sets, heavy, purposeful, not hunters, not lost travelers. He stood still for a long moment, reading the ground the way other men read newspapers. Pearl watched from the cabin doorway, her breath catching. She had learned Cain's silences by now. This one was dangerous. "Someone's been here," she said. "Yes," Cain replied, "and they didn't want to be seen." He followed the tracks for a short distance, then turned back. "They're circling, watching." Pearl's stomach tightened. "Bounty hunters?" "Most likely," he said. "Men who think my reputation is worth more dead than alive." "And me?" Cain met her gaze steadily. "Anyone who comes for me will use you if they think it'll work." The honesty frightened her more than reassurance ever could. That night, Cain finally told her the parts of his past he had kept buried. He had not always been the reaper of the Rockies. Once he had been a soldier, a young one, loyal, naive enough to believe the law protected the innocent. He spoke of a small frontier town, of a sheriff who took bribes, of outlaws who wore badges by day and robbed by night. "My wife and son were caught in the middle," Cain said quietly. "They were used as leverage. I was told to stand down." Pearl felt her chest ache. "I didn't," Cain continued, "but I was too late. When the law failed them, Something in me broke. I decided then that monsters shouldn't hide behind titles. You hunted them, Pearl said softly. Yes, Cain replied, and once I started, there was no turning back. Pearl reached for his hand. You became what the world needed. He shook his head. I became what the world fears. The following days were tense. Cain fortified the cabin without panic, but with unmistakable urgency. He checked weapons, mapped sightlines, set traps farther out, careful not to alarm Pearl, but unwilling to leave anything to chance. Pearl did not retreat into fear. Instead, she watched, learned, prepared. You don't have to do this, Cain said one evening as she cleaned a rifle with practiced hands. I know, she replied. I choose to. The visitors came 3 nights later. Voices carried through the trees, low, confident, too confident. Blackwood, a man shouted. We know you're in there. Cain's jaw set. They want me to come out. Pearl stood beside him. They won't stop if you do. No, Cain agreed. They won't. She met his eyes. Then we don't give them what they want. The confrontation was fast and violent. Gunfire shattered the stillness. Cain moved with terrifying precision, every step calculated. Pearl held her ground exactly where he told her to stand, exactly when to move. When it was over, the snow was marked with blood and broken weapons. 2 men lay dead. One fled into the dark, wounded and terrified. Pearl's hand shook only after it ended. Cain pulled her into his arms without hesitation. You were brave. So were you, she said, pressing her face against his chest. In the silence that followed, Pearl understood something clearly. Cain's life would never be simple. The past did not stay buried. Violence left echoes, and still she did not want to leave. The next morning, Cain found a letter nailed to a tree near the cabin. A warning. It spoke of contracts, of prices rising, of how long a man could run before even the mountains betrayed him. Cain crushed the paper in his fist. Pearl read the fear in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. I don't want this life to consume you, he said. If you want to go, I'll take you somewhere safe, far from me. Pearl stepped closer. You don't get to decide that alone. He searched her face. This isn't a fair life. She smiled sadly. Neither was the one I left behind. Pearl took his hands, grounding him the way he had grounded her so many times before. I'm not your weakness, she said. I'm your partner. The words settled between them, heavy and true. Outside, the mountains stood unmoved. Inside the cabin, a choice had been made. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The attack came before dawn. Pearl woke to the sound of Cain moving with purpose, not haste. Boots, a quiet click of metal. The fire dimmed low so it would not betray them through the windows. Outside, the wind carried something else now. Not weather, men. Cain did not raise his voice. They're closer than last time. Pearl sat up, heart steady in a way that surprised her. Fear was there, sharp and honest, but it no longer owned her. How many? 4, he said. Maybe 5. Professionals. She swung her legs over the bed. Then we use what you taught me. Cain studied her face in the low light. For a moment, she saw the weight he carried. Not fear for himself, but fear of losing what he had finally allowed himself to build. All right, he said at last. You stay with me. You do exactly what we practiced. I will. They took positions as the first voice cut through the trees. Blackwood, a man called, confident and cruel. Contracts doubled since last time. You made this interesting. Cain answered calmly. You don't have to die today. Laughter followed. We all die. Just a question of pay. The first shot shattered the quiet. Cain returned fire instantly, controlled and devastating. One man went down screaming. The sound ripped short as another shot followed. Pearl moved when Cain signaled, shifting to the secondary position they had rehearsed a dozen times. Her hands were steady. She saw movement to the right and fired once, clean and precise. The man dropped behind a tree, wounded but alive. "Nice shooting," Cain said quietly, not looking at her. More gunfire, wood splintered, smoke filled the cabin. Pearl felt the old voice rise inside her. Hide. Apologize. Let others decide. She pushed it down and focused on what was in front of her. A figure rushed the side window. Pearl acted without hesitation. The shot knocked the man backward into the snow. He did not get up. Silence fell suddenly, broken only by labored breathing and the distant wind. Cain waited a full minute before lowering his weapon. "It's over." Pearl exhaled slowly, legs trembling now that the danger had passed. Cain crossed the room and caught her before she could sit. "You're all right," he said, his voice rough. "You're all right." She looked up at him. "We're all right." They stepped outside together as the sky lightened with early morning. The damage was clear. Blood in the snow. 2 bodies. One trail leading away, dragged and uneven. "They'll talk," Pearl said. "Yes," Cain replied, "and they'll think twice." He burned the warning letter in the hearth and packed the bodies for the long trip down the mountain. It was not something Pearl wanted to see, and Cain did not make her. He moved with grim efficiency, a man closing a door he had kept shut for as long as possible. When he returned, the cabin felt different, not broken, changed. Cain sat heavily at the table. "I don't want this life to keep coming to our door." Pearl poured coffee with hands that still shook a little and set the cup in front of him. "Neither do I." He looked at her, searching. "If we leave, it won't be running. It'll be choosing." She nodded. "Then let's choose together." They talked as the day unfolded, about safer routes, about places Cain had avoided because the work was thin and the peace too quiet, about what it would mean to build a life that didn't rely on fear to keep it standing. "You could stop bounty work," Pearl said carefully. "Not all at once, but eventually." Cain stared into his cup. "I don't know who I am without it." "You're the man who gave a woman dignity when everyone else took it," she said. "You're the man who taught me to stand. That's not nothing." He closed his eyes briefly. "I don't deserve you." She shook her head. "You don't get to decide my worth by denying yours." That evening, Cain took out the marriage paper again. The cheap ink, the single dollar that had changed everything. "I want to do this right," he said, "not because of law, because of choice." Pearl's throat tightened. "Then ask me." Cain stood, suddenly unsure in a way Pearl had never seen him. He took her hands, rough and warm. "Pearl Pritchard," he said quietly, "will you marry me, not because you were sold, not because you were saved, but because you choose me as I choose you?" Tears spilled freely now. "Yes," she said, "yes, I choose you." The mountains held their silence as if bearing witness. The danger had come to their door and been turned away. What remained was not the absence of fear, but the presence of resolve. They would not let the past dictate the future. Together, they would decide what came next. Spring did not arrive all at once in the Bitterroot Mountains. It crept in slowly, cautious as a wounded animal. Snow pulled back from the southern slopes first, revealing dark earth and the first stubborn shoots of green. The creek ran louder with meltwater, no longer trapped beneath ice, no longer threatening, just moving, just alive. Pearl noticed the change before Cain did. "Listen," she said one morning, standing on the cabin's threshold. Cain paused, tools in hand. Birds called from the trees, tentative but present. Wind moved through branches without the sharp edge of winter. "It's different," he said. "Yes," Pearl replied. "It feels like permission." The cabin bore scars from the attack, repaired shutters, a replaced beam, bullet marks Cain chose not to sand away. "Some things," he said when she asked, "are meant to be remembered." Their days settled into a new rhythm. Cain no longer ranged as far. He took fewer contracts, choosing only those that would not pull him deep into the violence he was learning to loosen his grip on. Pearl handled correspondence, accounts, and logistics, her neat handwriting bringing order to a life that had once been nothing but pursuit. They worked side by side without ceremony. In the evenings, they sat by the fire or walked the lower trails where the snow had receded. Cain showed her places he had never brought anyone before, a ridge where the valley opened wide, a stand of trees spared by lightning years ago, a quiet hollow where he went when grief pressed too hard. "This was where I came after my family died," he said one afternoon, voice bare. "I didn't think I'd ever bring anyone here." Pearl slipped her hand into his. "Thank you for trusting me with it." He squeezed her fingers. "Thank you for making it something other than pain." They did not rush the wedding. There was no urgency in love that had already survived fire and fear. Instead, they let life build around them naturally. Pearl altered the cabin, widening a doorway, reinforcing a bench, making space without apology. Cain watched, something like pride softening his sharp features. "You don't ask permission," he observed. "I lived too long waiting for it," she said simply. Word traveled, as it always did. People spoke of Cain Blackwood less as a monster and more as a man who had chosen differently. Some still feared him. That was fine. Fear no longer defined him, and Pearl was no longer invisible. When travelers passed near the mountain, some stopped, drawn by rumors. A few asked for help. Cain listened. Pearl listened harder. "We don't owe the world anything," she reminded him one night. "I know," Cain said, "but we can still choose what kind of mark we leave." They stood together outside the cabin as dusk settled, lantern light glowing warm behind them. The mountains loomed, vast and indifferent, but no longer isolating. "Are you afraid," Cain asked quietly, "that this peace won't last?" Pearl considered the question honestly. "Sometimes, but I'm more afraid of going back to a life where I wasn't allowed to hope." Cain nodded. "Then we'll guard this, not with guns first, with choices." She leaned into him, solid and certain. "You know," she said, "you paid $1 for a chance." He smiled faintly. "Best investment I ever made." The future was still unwritten. There would be judgment beyond the mountains. There would be whispers. There would be days when the old wounds ached. But there would also be mornings like this, evenings like now, a life shaped not by what had been taken from them, but by what they chose to build together. The cabin lights burned steadily as night fell. Inside, 2 people sat at the same table, equal and unafraid, not because the world had grown kinder, but because they had grown stronger. And for the first time, that was enough. Every story you listen to carries more than words. It carries the weight of being seen, the courage of standing up, and the quiet power of choosing dignity when the world offers none. Pearl's journey is not just about the mountains or the man who saved her. It's about reclaiming worth, about refusing to be defined by cruelty, and about building a life on respect instead of fear. I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. What part of the world are you in? And if you still believe that love can rise from the harshest places, stay with me. The next story is already waiting for you.